Let me tell you a little story how I judge that. I was at a seminar once where there was a panel of presidents talking about leadership. And somebody from the audience asked a question, what's the most important role of the president or the CEO? And the response came back, make payroll. And at first you think, what? Make payroll? You mean it's not about academics and, student and all that? Yes, that is. But if you don't make payroll, you don't pay people, you don't pay the personnel to do the work, if you don't pay the bills to make things happen, then it all goes to pot real quick. To date, we have not lost any payroll. We have not had to borrow money to make payroll. Many districts in the state already are beginning to borrow money because they don't have the reserves to do the cash flow. They do business, know about some of these elements that I'm talking about. It's important. It's just not like there's money sitting around. It's got to come from somewhere. When you don't have it, you have to borrow, which compounds the problem. This district has not had to do that. People have gotten their checks, and we paid vendors. Once in a while, a little bit slow, but they're paid. Because we've got to keep our good credit and everything else that people want to do business with us, so we can, in order to provide things we need to support students. So it gets to be this big business process behind the scenes that makes everything happen, so that we can complete our mission, so we can complete and support students and helping you finish your education or move on to wherever you want to go. So this is a big deal for all of us. But I want to share to you today, and so Sue is going to be here to explain to you where we are and how we got to this, and then a little bit later we'll finish off with Robert Cabral, our academic senate president, to show you a little bit at the campus level about how we process that a little bit here at the campus level. Because once we get the money allocated to us, it's up to this campus to make decisions about how we distribute that money and where it goes in terms of instruction, student services, or business services, and provide all the things that we have here. So welcome, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be here. I ask that nobody hold me personally responsible for the little gray cloud I carry over my head when I deliver these messages. I'm merely the messenger. I want to talk, I'm going to start with California. I'm not going to go to the nation of the world. That's as gloomy as everything else. But I'm going to start with the state, work down to the district, and then down to the college itself. First thing I want to show you is the revenue reductions that we've experienced in the district over the past several years. You'll see in fiscal year 10, we received $4.6 million less in state apportionments than we did in the prior year. And that's when it seriously started happening. Over the past years before that, we would have $1 million mid-year that came as sort of a surprise, where they'd give us an allocation in July, and then in December or February, they take $1 million away from us. But this really started to experience the significant slide. In fiscal year 10, we lost 4.6, and in fiscal year 11, we got back $1.5 million, and that was because of some growth that we were due. Now, our expenses are going up faster than that revenue number, so that even was a decline at that point in time. You'll see what happened this year. And this year, when we signed the budget, when the budget was signed in July, we were allocated a $7.5 million reduction, $7.5 million. And that budget was built on the assumption that taxes would be presented to the voters, and taxes weren't presented to the voters. The legislature did not have the wherewithal to do that, and there wasn't any ballot initiatives. And part of the approved budget of the state was that if those taxes didn't come in, or if the revenue was not that was projected, then we would experience cuts in December, which did occur. The revenue was much lower than that projected. And we saw that coming because in May they were projecting revenue at a certain level, and then in June suddenly revenue went up by $5 billion. $5 billion. And nobody could explain where it came from. Well, where it came from was somebody's idea that it might be there so that they could pass the budget, get their paychecks, and go out of town. In December, around December 15th, the Department of Finance came out, actually affirmed that the revenue was less, and our portion of that trigger cut was another $2.5 million. That was on top of the $7.5 million we were given in July. In February, they came out, just a month ago, they came out and indicated that property taxes was much lower than that included in the budget, and that student enrollment fee collections were much lower than that included in the budget. And they passed on a $3.2 million deficit to our district. Now, at the statewide level, that was over $100 million, but our portion of it was $3.2 million. So this fiscal year is $13 million less than the prior fiscal year, which was only $1 million more than the year before that. So if you look, you're seeing in a 3-year period, we've lost $16.2 million in revenue. That's just in the general fund. Now, in addition, we had other things going on. The state took away significant categorical funds. EOPS experienced like a 40% reduction in their revenue, as well as the other categorical programs got almost equivalent cuts. So this was $16.2 million to our district just from that 3-year span of time. In addition to that, we are looking at potential triggers in this upcoming year of $6.8 million if the tax initiatives that they're attempting to get on the ballot, if the voters do not, if they, 1, don't make it to the ballot, or 2, make it to the ballot and fail, we will be given another $6.8 million reduction in November. Over that same period of time, our expenses go up. We have step and column increases, we have benefit increases, we have retirement cost increases. So the personnel costs are increasing at a rate of $3 to $4 million. So over that period of time, we've experienced $10 to $12 million of expenditure increases while revenue is coming down. So between this number and this number, before the triggers in the fall, we're talking about $26, $28 million shortfall in our district alone. So if you're wondering why there's pain thus far, that's why there's pain. So it didn't just happen. We're pretty much in the middle of a cycle. It's not over, and it's not just beginning. This kind of demonstrates that we're in the middle of that cycle. The governor's tax proposal. The governor came out in January, as he does every year. The beginning of any budget cycle is the governor's initial budget proposal, which is presented publicly in January. And he presented that there be a tax initiative that goes to the voters rather than the legislature, because he couldn't get the legislature to pass it. And that initiative was an increased sales tax of 0.5% over what we pay today. And personal income tax goes up significantly on the higher income individuals and corporations. Many of our small businesses are independently formed and pay personal income tax as such. So anybody making over $250,000, their brackets would go up as well. Now recently, about a week or so ago, there was a compromise. There were 3 or 4 tax initiatives out there that have potential of appearing on the ballot in November. And I'll tell you, the more initiatives there are in November, the less likelihood they are to pass, for a couple of reasons. One is they bash each other. So they kind of say, my initiative is good, these other 3 are bad. And the voters just get confused because they look redundant. So is this one better than this one? Is better than this one? So they vote no on them all. Historically, that's what happens. Last week, 2 of the main potential initiatives, the governors and the teachers union, got together in a compromise and came up with one initiative. That's going to be a huge help because they would have both put a lot of money in campaigns, and the campaigns would have been anti the other, and now all those money is going together. So that's going to help the initiative process. There is still another major initiative out there to support education. That education is K-12, doesn't include us.
This tax initiative does not guarantee money to us as a community college or guarantee money to K-12. What it does is puts in general fund resources, and Proposition 98 funds education, and that will increase the level available for Prop 98. And so one could assume that those dollars will then result as increases here. So that's what's going on the tax initiative process. They've recently polled that they could pass, but both initiatives polled that they could pass. And if that occurs, again, if both of them hit the ballot initiative, there's no way they can vote pass because of the majority votes necessary. What did the governor propose for us as a system? Basically, his overall budget proposal included cuts to many areas, expenditure reductions, and this tax initiative, and some shifts in funding. The community college system was proposed at a no increase, no decrease, so whatever we got this year to continue next year. And there is a proposal in the governor's initial proposal to consolidate all of our categorical programs except for a portion of one and foster care, a portion of disabled students, as well as foster care totally. Everything else would be put into one pool and allocated towards student success funds. The governor proposed no additional fee increase. Fees are going up. Part of the December triggers were a $10 increase. It included a $10 increase when the trigger was pulled, and that's going to increase fees from $36 a unit to $46, but the governor has proposed no further increase in the fall. Now, as far as this governor's proposal has gone thus far, the Democrats have come up against the cuts that he's made, and so a lot of those cuts were in the human services area, in the welfare, Medi-Cal, those sort of things. And if those reductions, expenditure reductions, are not passed, then they're going to have to get the money from somewhere else. So the fact that we're projecting a flat revenue based on this, it doesn't mean that that's how the budget process will come out. The whole legislative process will kick in about a month, and they'll debate and come up with something to offer back to the governor, and the budget will actually end up somewhere in between all of those proposals. This is the initiative failure that you saw on the last screen. Included in the governor's proposal is mid-year triggers for the community college system to the tune of $292 million if the tax initiative doesn't pass. And our portion of that is $6.8 million. So we looked at the budget over a 2-year period, and we've been attempting to do this over the past couple of years, and I'll explain to you this is very difficult. We don't know what our budget is for this current year yet. As I mentioned to you, we had a mid-year cut of $2.4 million. We had the February cut of $3.2 million, and we'll get P2, which is an adjustment in June, which could be another number up or down. And so knowing what your budget is at any given time is quite a challenge. So looking out in the future 2 years forward is even that much more of a challenge. What we're looking at is this. I've mentioned 2 deficits that we have in the current year. One of them is going to carry into next year, and the other one will not. So the mid-year cuts, we balanced our budget with a deficit because we went to the board in June last year, and we said, we've got to make some decisions locally regardless of what's going on in the state. And so we asked the board to accept the budget as we knew it then, and if the budget decreased at any time during that fiscal year, that they use reserves to balance it with, and they accepted that recommendation. So in June, we passed a budget at a certain level. In September, when the final budget came in, it was about $600,000 short of that, so they went to reserves, and then 2.4 short in December. So as of December, we were short $3 million, and that's an ongoing shortage, so that's gonna carry into this year as a shortage. The February shortage was a misprojection on the state part, and so that won't carry forward. So we're only dealing with the first two hits, not the third. So we have $3 million that we're spending this year that will not exist next year. So we've got to cut there. In addition, I told you the expenditures go up 3 to 4 million a year, and we're projecting this year is going to be about 3.2 million. So we have a 3 million revenue shortage, a 3 million increase in expenditures, so we're upside down $6 million. That's before the governor does anything or the legislature does anything. We're already upside down $6 million, and we've got to cut there. If the tax initiatives don't pass, we'll layer 6.8 million on top of that. So by December of this year, we could be upside down 12.8 million if we don't reduce our budgets. So then we carried that into next year and said, if this year's gonna be short 12.8, what's next year's gonna look like? We're assuming flat revenue for the moment, an inflationary cost of 3 million. This is the 16 million that Dr. Duran was talking about. So over this coming budget year and the one that follows, we expect to be $16 million short of between our expenditures and our revenue. So we went to the board and we said, how do you want to handle this? Do you want to do the 6 million this year? Do you want to do 12 million this year? Do you want to do 16 million? What do you want to do? Our recommendation was they split that in half, 8 and 8. They accepted our recommendation. So we're building the FY13 budget, the upcoming budget year budget, assuming an $8 million shortage, knowing that that means we've pushed 8 million forward into next year. And so this is the budget that we're actually carrying forward to the board now. Now, why can't we go to reserves? Reserves is always everybody's hot item. We've got plenty of reserves. Why aren't we using them? So this is showing you why we can't use more and how we already have used them. June 30 of this year, July 1 of this year, we had 25 million in reserves. Now that sounds pretty big to most of you, I'm sure, as you're balancing your local little checking account, you go, well, 25 million, you could do a lot with 25 million. Every month, the amount of checks to our employees, to our healthcare providers for our employees, and our vendors range between 18 million and 25 million. So that's what we write in checks in a single month. So 25 million isn't a lot of money for this size organization. Again, we started the year with 25 million. We used 3 million here. We had a hazmat issue that we had to clean up, and actually that was at Oxnard, and so we used that. And then we took the 3.2 out in February. So we're down to 18.6. So you can see how fast 25 becomes 18. If we only cut this upcoming year $8 million, when we're really looking at a possible shortfall of 12.8, then in November, if the initiatives don't pass, we'll have to go to reserves for 4.8 million. We'll be down to 13.8. So we've almost cut reserves in half in a 1.5 year period of time. That's why we're not comfortable going to reserves any further than we already have. This is a dangerously low number for us.
Sue,
Yes.
Somebody had asked me about the minimum we have to keep in our reserves that the state requires.
The state required minimum prudent balance is 7 million. But we couldn't cut 1 month's worth of checks if we had that, but that is the state mandate. Had we had 7 million here when we closed the budget, and that's all we had, in December, we would have come back to the sites and cut 3 million more out, and in February, we would have come back to the sites and cut another 3 million out. There's no choice but to do that if you start with your minimum. So this has protected us from drastic mid-year cuts that are really unplanned and unmanageable, as opposed to pulling together a plan to deliver the reductions in some sort of controlled fashion. And this step down we're planning of 8 and 8, although it's ugly, it's at least controlled. And that's our objective, to not just be running helter-skelter. Now, this next screen is an uncomfortable screen for students. I apologize up front. The state pays us so many full-time equivalent students. So they take all the units that we can teach and divide it by a full-time equivalent student and say, we're gonna pay you for this many students. And that's confusing to students. They know perhaps that we get paid so much per student, but they don't realize that that number is capped. So we could have another 5,000 full-time equivalent students, the state doesn't pay us for them. So if you look at this chart, back in '09, we were actually nearly paid for that number of students. I think in '07, we were fully paid for the number of students we had. You can see that the state in 10 reduced the number of students that they paid us for, and that was associated with that $4.8 million I showed you on that first screen. And then in the next year, it went up slightly, and that was the $1.5 million in growth, so that number went up. And then this year, it's gone way back down to 24,504. And if we get triggers, it will drop to 23,015. That's a significant drop in a time when the demand for education is greater than ever. There's an inverse relationship between the economy and demand for education. As the economy tanks, more students want to go to school. And there's less resources for that education. As economy recovers, students go to work and take less units in school. And so when you need education the most, you have the least funding for it in a state-supported education system. And that's what's happening here. So as the economy is tanking, our funded FTES is going down. However, our demand for education is going up. So in FY09, we had 2,500 full-time equivalent students. So that's like 3,500, 4,000 students taking classes that the state did not pay us for. In 10, fiscal year 10, so that's July 9 through June of 10, we had almost 3,400 unfunded FTES. We shrunk the class schedule and brought that down to 1,170. It popped back up to 1,745. So that's where we are now. So there are this many more students in classes than we're paid for here by the state. If the triggers occur, there will be this many more students that we're not getting paid for. Yes?
Since we're allowed to jump in with questions.
Sure.
One of those things that I've never understood about unfunded FTES is how it's more than just unfunded on paper. Because we've got our class schedule laid out with all the teachers in place, and if we've got 30 or 45 in the same classroom, we're using the same lights, we're paying the teachers the same.
So your
Where
question is, where's the marginal cost?
Yeah,
What's the
real
marginal
money?
cost of a student?
Mhm.
It's difficult to calculate because there's a lot of support services going on, and depending on whether you offered more classes or not and how well spread they are, if we're at 100% fill rate or we're not. And I'll tell you, our fill rate over the past several years, and that's how many seats in a class are taken up. So if you look at our fill rate, it's running like 96% now. You go back to 4 or 5 years ago, and there were 10 seats open in a class, but now they're not. So in order to educate those students, you have to add another section.
But if we're not adding sections,
They're
if we're
dropping our
talking about-
number, but they're dropping our number. So if you don't cut the sections,
Okay, so you're saying that
We have less
because
revenue.
we had a schedule before and it was a unstated assumption that we would be cutting 10% of those because there wouldn't be sufficient enrollment but instead we're actually having to carry the class because we have the students?
Right.
Okay,
And the revenue's not there to carry that class.
right.
And I will also tell you, we get approximately 4,600, because that's gonna be the next question. What do we get per student? We get approximately 4,600. K-12 gets about almost 7,000 per student. Community colleges get 4,600. So do the math on this times 4,600 and see what the state really owes us if they were paying us for all the students we had. But that isn't how the system works. They tell you how many you can have. Now, if we continued to educate students at this rate, what's the state, the legislatures are sneaky little devils, what do you think they'd say? Looks to me like you can educate students for $4,100 because you've been doing it for 3 years. So here's your new funding model, $4,100 a student. I mean, there's no question, they're already looking at that. So our objective then, take this out of the picture for the moment, our objective is to take this 1745 and reduce it to 500. It's very dangerous to play with zero, because if you miss it, you lose revenue. So it will be our objective to lower the 1745 down to 400 or eliminate 1,200 full-time equivalent students. And that's the ugly part for students, and I apologized for that in advance. But that's the reality of what we must do to live within our reduced budget. So what do we consider when we roll out a budget? We have to reduce the FTES, because if you don't reduce the FTES and you have to cut the 8 million, it's all going to come out of classified and management and some operating expenses, because you can't take it out of instruction. So if you reduce the unfunded FTES, what do we need to consider? Ventura College, there are 3 levels of funding from the state that gives you a base, and it's a small base, but it gives you a base, and then it gives you the 4,600 on top of that. And the difference between a small college and a medium college is $600,000. Ventura is a very small medium college. If Ventura falls from being a middle-sized college to a small college, we as a district lose $600,000. That's beyond all the other numbers I've showed you. So it's in the district, i.e. Oxnard's, best interest to make sure Ventura stays above that number. And that number is about 9,600 FTES. We also need to be sure that Oxnard College does not spiral. The fear about a small college is, as a small college downsizes, if it's not done very carefully, it very easily can spiral. And by spiraling, that's sort of an uncontrolled stepping down, where you have less students, you get less money, you have less students, you get less money, you have less students, you get less money. So we need to manage that very judiciously and make sure Oxnard doesn't fall over the cliff. We also have to monitor full-time, part-time faculty ratios and the number of full-time faculty we have, because all that is in ed code, so regardless of what's going on with your money, you still have to have so many full-time faculty. The result of these is that we distribute the reductions in a balanced fashion across the district, across the college. So we can't take it all out of instruction, we can't take it all out of non-instruction. We have to balance it between instruction and non-instruction. But because we need to be careful of these things, you won't see the exact same mix of reductions in the instructional area and non-instructional among the 3 colleges. One is going to have more instructional and less classified. The other one is going to have less instructional, more classified, because of these things we want to keep in mind up top. So what we agreed to do at a cabinet level was that we would distribute the 1,200 FTES by giving Moorpark College 700, Oxnard 100, and Ventura 400. And if you look at these numbers, this is the current distribution of full-time equivalent students, and this is the 1,200. So because Oxnard received 100 of 1,200, it's 8% of the FTES reduction. Because had we gone with this number, which by some account might have been a more fair number, then you would have lost almost 300 full-time equivalent. But because we wanted to protect against that spiraling, we didn't do that, okay? So this is an important thing to keep in mind, and this again is the distribution of the 1,200. We have an allocation model that was approved a few years ago. That allocation model is reviewed by a participatory governance committee every year to see if there are any changes that should be made to the model. And we haven't made any this year, we didn't make any last year. The model, going through the model, this is the distribution of the 8 million, give or take. It's roughly 3.2 million at Moore Park, 1.7 here, 2.5 at Ventura, and $500,000 at the district. If you look at how those reductions were distributed in the balance that I was talking about between instruction, non-instruction, and so forth, this is how the 8 million comes out. It's 3.6 million across the instructional spectrum. Now, 3.6 million, if you did the math, if you know how much it costs to offer a class and so forth, that math wouldn't work out at all. This number would be about 1.8, 1.7. And the reason for that is that we're only eliminating 1,200 FTES. I know that's a huge number, but we're eliminating 1,200 FTES, but we're eliminating more sections than that, in part because of what Kitty just asked in her question, that we're looking at more productive classes or more seats in a class, so we can save dollars. Let's say you have 4 classes with 30 people in it. 4 classes with 30 people is 120 people. If we eliminate one section and make it 3 classes with 40 people in it, we're still teaching 120 students, but we have 1 less class section, and therefore we've saved money. So that's what you're seeing up here. This also includes any program eliminations or reductions that were approved earlier in the year for the upcoming year. That kind of class schedule management that I mentioned on, taking 4 classes, 4 sections of the same course and moving it into 3 sections, those kind of things are kind of an ongoing process that have been going on over the past several years. But that's why the number doesn't foot across if you do the math. So 3.6 million, or less than half of the dollars, is coming out of instruction. This is a classified positions that are somehow connected with the overall class schedule. Now that may mean a lab tech, because labs aren't being offered in the summer, so we're reducing a lab tech from 12 months to 10 or 12 months to 11 or something like that. It might include a reduction in library staff, anything like that that is adjusting to the new class schedule. The class schedule used to be pretty much a 12-month-a-year class schedule. We no longer offer 4-year. We have a 4-week summer session. We haven't done that in 3 years now. And that we weren't able to reduce staff right away, but as an aggregate with all these other changes, that's some of what's in this $500,000, as well as maybe people associated with the program eliminations or reductions. We also have done some very intense studying of potential restructurings that we could do. How could we deliver services differently and therefore have less staff deliver them? And that's this 1.4 million. This is pure dollars. Go ahead.
I'll let you finish that.
This is pure dollars. We just didn't have the money in any other line. We had to take it out here. That's also classified. So we have 3.6 out of instruction, 2.7 out of classified, 300 out of management, and 1.4 out of operating to get to our 8 million. Robert.
I've seen your presentation many times. Every time I see it, I have so many questions.
Me too.
Let me ask you one topic more, because a few slides back, you talked about what the state allocates us per FTES, and it's about $4,600 or so. And one of the issues that we have in this district is the amount of unfunded FTES. And we want to make sure that we don't create a perception with our legislators that we can educate our students cheaper than $4,600.
Right.
And when I look at this slide now, if we're looking at an $8 million reduction, and that's going to help us reduce our FTES by 1,200, are we making the assumption that it's only costing us $3,000 now based on our unfunded?
No.
Or I guess what I'm asking, if we're getting paid $4,600 now per state, based on the number of unfunded students, how much are we actually, proportion per student, how much are we actually using towards each student? Is it closer to 41? Is it closer to?
No, because the
Do we get that?
4,600 is everything we get. So it also pays for the groundskeeper to mow the lawn. It's not just to pay the instructor, it's to pay the whole operation of the college. Now, the inflationary expense that I mentioned, cost going up $3 million, that doesn't even count whether the cost of fertilizer went up. Fertilizer, that's a good point right now. So, you were having that thought, weren't you? I could read your mind. So, the issue of costs at a college are still accelerating. We used to get COLA, 2.5%, 3%, sometimes 4% a year to cover those inflationary costs. That's no longer happening. So even if your revenue did not drop, let's say it's the same every year, it's 100, 100, 100, 100, you would have to cut because your costs are going up for all these other things. So the cost per student and the marginal cost per student is not on this line, it's on these lines. And the overall cost of what you can cut, the issue of the marginal cost per student, we couldn't take any money out of electricity, even though the state is going to pay for less students. So this actually turns out pretty balanced. If you look at the cost of instruction today on our overall budget, it's less than 50%. So here, we're cutting less than 50% of the cuts. So we're gonna maintain about the same balance as we have today. Now, if you go to this slide, this slide is for the 3 colleges in the district office, district-wide services, utilities. This slide is for Oxnard College alone. So we've taken $650,000 out of instruction, out of 1.6 million. So that's far less than 0.5% of 50%. And that's because we're only reducing 100 FTES as opposed to 300 FTES. So we're taking 650 out of instruction, 250 associated with class schedules again, 200 in restructuring, 200 in budget, or 650 in classified. No change to management, and 270 in operation. So this is how the dollars are spread, the reductions of the 1.7 million. And notice this is only 1.6 because the foundation last year gave the college $100,000. This coming year, they're gonna give them $200,000, so they had to cut 100 less than they would have otherwise had to cut. Questions about this? I told you we're in the middle, so what's gonna happen after this? We've had 3-4 years of fairly serious reductions. We have this upcoming year, which is a mess, and what's gonna happen after that? Several years ago, I'm gonna say 3 years ago, the state said we were in a fiscal problem and that that would last 3 to 4 years. This year, they're saying we have a fiscal problem and it will last 3 to 4 years. So even with the passage of a budget initiative, we're gonna have some serious issues. We hope that what that budget initiative will do is to stop the sliding, stop the free falling. We don't expect an increase in revenues as such. We expect a flattening of the curve that's been going like this. Now, something I didn't point out here, we have an extremely volatile tax system, and that's what's caused a lot of these problems. In our current tax system, our current general fund state revenue, over 50% of the revenue is tied to personal income tax. This tax initiative is projected to bring it to 62%. Now, much of personal income tax, not only is it tied to the economic conditions of the state, but it's tied to capital investments. In the year 2000, personal income tax, and therefore the state budget, personal income tax grew 28% in a single year. That was dot-com boom. The state immediately started spending that 28%. The next year, income tax dropped 25%. The state can't bring down expenditures that quickly. It's amazing how you can go out and buy yourself a new car, a new home, but then the next year, you can't sell both those things quickly, right? Well, that's what the state did. And so they couldn't reduce their expenditures at the same rate. Revenue was dropping, and so they started playing these accounting shell games. And that's what has brought a lot of our problems to fruition, because it's just, they were moving things around, they were borrowing dollars, there's no more dollars to borrow, there's no more money to move around, and they've lost a lot of lawsuits tied to some of the maneuvers they made. And it's basically because so much of the state general fund revenue that supports education, K-12, some CSU, UC, it supports prisons, it supports the Medi-Cal, home care, all of that stuff is all paid primarily out of 62% of it comes from personal income tax. If people aren't making money in the market, if they're not employed, all of that personal income tax is down, so all the revenue for the state is down. Questions? You're a quiet group. There were a third of the people here yesterday with 10 more questions. You're just quiet or depressed? Or I should be here in the morning instead of the afternoon. No questions? Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
Is there any way to tell how much money has been previously taken from Oxnard College? I know that it seems like we're getting the equivalent of, I think it was 100 FTS, I don't remember the slide, I don't have it in front of me, but I know in the past, we have lost FTS in the past, is that true?
Well, yes, everyone's FTES is down significantly.
Right, and has it been
Proportionate.
It's been
Yeah.
proportional away. Why is it so out of proportion this time?
It's not out of proportion.
Yeah.
If you look at, it's not out of proportion at all. Where it's out of proportion, whoops, this is proportionate. This goes through the model. Oxnard's roughly 18% of the overall FTES, of the overall budget. It's always been about that. So to say, what about the money that was taken from Oxnard? No money has ever been taken from Oxnard unless the whole district has gone down. Oxnard has remained about the same proportionate size, which is somewhere between 18 and 20% of overall students. And that's historical. You can go back a decade and see that you're somewhere between 18 and 20%. So when you use a budget allocation model to distribute the income, the revenue, you're distributing about 18% of it to Oxnard College. The reductions aren't a takeaway, it's that there's no money to distribute. But you're getting the same proportionate share of revenue as you have and as of your size. Now when you go over here, I forget where that chart was, here, this merely says you don't have to take so much of that 1.7 out of the instructional side. Well, what does that mean? That means that you don't have to cut FTES, it means you're gonna cut more classified, because your proportionate cut doesn't change. But Oxnard has not lost more money than the other sites over time.
I don't know if I was even suggesting that. So Moore Park had 700, and you didn't have this as a slide. Moore Park is 700
This is
down,
the 700.
right, and Oxnard's 100 down, and VC is 400 down.
That's right, and that's projected to be down in the
So
upcoming
last
year.
is there any listing of the numbers last year?
Yes.
What those numbers would have been, like what, for example, would Moore Park have been last year?
Everybody dropped about 5%. I could have brought that chart with me, but I didn't. This year, all three colleges are down an average of 5, I think it's 5%. And there's not a significant swing in how much they're down between each other.
So the numbers last year could have been, instead of 700 for Moore Park, it would have been 350, instead of 100 for Oxnard, it would have been 50, and instead of 400 for VC, it would have been 200. The proportionality would have remained the same for the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, no, because this is not proportionate. It would have been more like this. This is protection for Oxnard. So last year, you dropped more like this. So you would have naturally had less money. If you're, let me use 40, 40, 20. So if this number were 40, 20, and 40, and 20% of the revenue comes to you, give or take in the formula. There are different ways that it happens, but in general, you're not getting less money. What you do with that money is a college discretion, and Robert's gonna go into that a little. Whether you keep classified and let sections go, or whether you keep sections and let classified go, that's a college decision.
So the 100 FTS drop here, that would be made, that decision was made on this campus, it was not made
No,
at the district?
No. What we said at cabinet was, we feel that if Oxnard dropped next year, the upcoming year, by 250 or 300, that is more than they can afford to drop. If we have to drop 1,200 totally, these two people have to pick it up, and actually it went here. So Moore Park picked up Oxnard's additional share of a reduction in FTES. Now what does that mean? That means if Oxnard didn't cut their class schedule at a proportionate rate, then they had to take it out of staff and operating. That's what it meant.
So the district made the decision that it would be out of staff and operating rather than out of class schedule?
The cabinet
The cabinet, pardon me,
made the
cabinet.
decision that if Oxnard wanted relief, and the president wanted that relief, that somebody else was willing to pick it up,
Who's in the cabinet?
the president. So had the president said, no, I want to drop 18%, I want 18% of the 1,200, he would have walked away with 18%. It was done for the protection here
So we don't spiral.
because
We're
of being a
protecting
small
instruction.
college. So it's a good thing. What I hear in you is that it could be a bad thing. I
What I'm
think
hearing-
it was,
What you should be hearing from me, or what I would like to present
Sure.
would be, is there a way to show year over year how much of the instructional has been dropped? So instead of
Yeah.
700,
I gave that to PBC
Right.
last meeting,
Oh,
over
so that's what PBC at last meeting,
uh,
okay.
10, 12 years
Okay.
of, and what you'll find on that chart is proportionately, and I don't remember the number, I'm gonna say 52%, your instructors have been 52% of your budget. 52, 52 and a half, 53, but right there. It didn't swing from 40% to 60%. It also showed the FTES across the chart and so forth.
And if I recall, there is a law, isn't there a 50% law or something, so that probably has something?
Yeah, but it's a little squirmy when you look at instructor's cost versus 50% law, but about, we figure instruction overall, instruction is less than 50% of the budget. Instructors are 50%, because in the 50% law, it doesn't include your librarians or your counselors or non-instructional
So
people.
we could get from, this is my last thing, so we could get from PVC, we could take those numbers, we could start to see a kind of trend line. It looks
Sure.
as though, okay, so we could start to just
Sure.
begin to get the trend line.
Absolutely.
How instructional
Yeah.
is being up or
I
down.
passed
up or
that
down.
out at the
All right,
last
very good.
meeting, and I actually have another meeting, another spreadsheet that we just finished today, which packages it by administrative services, student services, instruction.
I'm just asking for clarity,
Yeah.
information, not
Exactly.
weighing anything one way
Yeah.
or the other. All right, very good.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
we do that historically.
So, I want to say that Oxnard College has been historically 18% roughly of the district's.
18 to 20, yes.
18%? Okay, because I remember the time that we used to receive in revenue about 21.65%. Were we then getting, at that time, proportionately a greater percentage or something?
Well,
like
I'll
that?
tell you, we have changed some things. We took all the utilities out of colleges and said it's crazy that if you had to have a hot summer or a cold winter or whatever, that you have these huge swing in expenses. So we took all utilities out and centralized them. So depending on when you're talking about, that could have occurred. And the FTES, you know, I don't have the data with me, so, but it's not like you were ever 25, 26% of the overall district
So who's
FTES.
paying the utilities now? Is that a part of the district budget then?
No, it's a separate cost center. It comes off the top of the model.
I'm looking forward to the point where we're coming out of this death spiral that the state of California is in, as I think we all are. At that point, Oxnard College will have had the advantage of not having cut instruction, but the disadvantage of having cut more classified proportionally. What are we going to do to revive the campus? Is there anything that's being inculcated as like a plan for coming out of it so that we're not going to have to fight our way through to reinstate all these positions that are going
Sure.
up in smoke?
The coming out of it, first of all, it's gonna flatten first. And we're not gonna come out of it for a while. So any of you that are only gonna be here 2-3 years, you probably won't see the coming out of it. But it will flatten, and that's gonna be positive, by the way. But all of that is part of the program review process and so forth. So if you say, I have this much money, I have, what's your budget now, Richard? 24
About
million?
25, just under
$25
$25
million.
yeah.
I have $25 million. How am I gonna spend that? Those are choices that the college makes, and Robert's gonna get in to that now. It's like, are we gonna have 30 programs, or are we gonna have 20 programs? Are we gonna have 20 electives, or are we gonna have 6 electives for this one thing? And package that more efficient for students so you can move some money over here. So all of that.
Are there any statistics or anything that you go by as you're looking at programs that they need to have this amount of support staff to make them viable?
You don't want to look at that because it is so ugly. The state
heard
used to
that.
do program-based funding, and so they would say, you should have this much dollars for square footage based on the needs of buildings, and you should have this much for student services based on head count, you should have this much for instruction based on FTES. All of that was program-based funding, and we were funded at a rate at one time of a high of 52% of that rate. So who cares what the rates were? You know, they're only giving you half enough money to meet the rates. So the colleges have to make those decisions, and that's part of the restructuring that we've been doing. Can we deliver this particular service differently with less people so we can move those dollars over to here, or so we can prevent cutting over here? And that's where you have a tremendous amount of local discretion to do that.
And so, and what I'm hearing is that really, we need to look at these cuts not as short-term classified cuts, but these are permanent changes we're seeing to our institution.
The restructuring,
Within-
definitely, that you want to restructure on a sustainable basis, and when you get money back in, you probably won't take it out of where you you won't put it back where you took it out of, you'll put it somewhere else. Because it's gonna be a new college on the other side, it's gonna be a new district on the other side, and everybody really needs to accept that and plan for that. So you say, what do we wanna be in year 2016? And you start moving toward that, or at least planning for it by setting these pieces in motion so you can do what I said, by not backfilling here. You know, it's a very natural tendency to say, I'm gonna cut here in year one, and when I get the money back in year two, I'm gonna put it right back there. Well, probably then you shouldn't have cut there. You probably should have cut somewhere else, and that's what management and the whole process, PBC on programs, is trying to look at and say, what do we wanna be in a few years? And we're gonna be something different.
That's also why, in terms of trying to look down the road, we're gonna go update our educational master plan. Because this all should be linked back to what programming, where do we wanna be as a college? And so the first step in that process is we're working on how to try to get an environmental scan. You start with the data. What's the need of the community? We go back and to validate what programs do we need. And then it goes from there into the master plan. And then that translates into the facilities plan and the technology plans. So we've got to reinvent and say, where are we going to be now? What kind of college do we want to be in 5 years? The original assumptions on the educational master plan was based on growth. We were gonna grow and do all these things. Right now, the reality is for the next 2 or 3 years, we're gonna still continue to decline and at best be flat. And then what? So we have to ask ourselves some real hard questions, maybe even review the mission again. Can we sustain our mission? When the reality is we're not gonna have that. Where should our priority be? And how are we gonna translate that into programs and services? So I think we're gonna be embarking, and we're starting to get the data now for the summer, so that when we come back in the fall, we're gonna be going through a whole revamping of the educational master plan and updating it. We have to ask ourselves some of those kinds of questions.
And I think
When somebody sees this on YouTube and they wanna get involved, what should they be doing? If they wanna share their opinions as part of our community, should they be contacting the president's office, the
Yes.
district, or where?
the president, because it's, we have 3 different colleges today. We will have 3 different colleges later, but they will still be different, but they won't be the same different. And I think the issue of, if you read the mission statement for community colleges, we are everything to everybody. And probably what is clear is the taxpayers aren't paying for that anymore. So we have to decide what we're gonna be to who. And that's gonna be different at every college, I think. Wouldn't you agree, Richard?
Yeah, in terms of the environmental scanning, one of the things we're gonna do different this year is to do a community survey. And we were identifying, as we were talking about marketing and all that, getting surveys from different segments of the community, business, education, government, etc., so we can get their direct opinions as part of our environmental scan. And so we can solicit what are their perceptions of Oxnard College and what is it they think we ought to be doing to service our community.
And it's what should you be doing versus what should you cut? Because you've all experienced loud and clear that nobody wants to cut. So if you say, I'm cutting this, they go, no, don't cut that. Well, you say, okay, I'll cut this. No, don't cut that either. Don't cut this, don't cut this. Well, that's a lack of reality. What do you want? And then we fund what you want, and what you didn't want doesn't get funded. It doesn't get cut, it just doesn't get funded. So you have to approach it for what do you want to be.
This became heavier all of a sudden. So thank you, Sue. Let me just add, I'm going to talk about a couple slides, and I'm going to try to use using analogies as example to kind of help paint the picture of how I think Senate and faculty at the campus kind of see our overall budget dilemma or a budget process that we're doing. One thing just to kind of, to make sure we're all in agreement on is that the uniqueness about this district is that we're not, we have something called discretionary funding. So once monies are being allocated us through the state system that comes through the district, we could basically, as Sue said, we could basically do anything we want with that $25 million.
we could take that $25 million and buy 25 million lottery tickets tonight for that 472 million
Go
on
for
the
it.
weekend, and then call it a night. But
And you could end up with a lot or nothing.
so the beauty about discretionary is that we have a lot of autonomy here, and so we're not a franchise, so we don't have to look the same or be the same or act the same like the other two campuses are. And so one of the struggles that we deal with at the Senate side is that, you know, I'll talk a little bit about our voice and how we play an active and an influential role in what we do, but also to kind of use the analogy as if, you know, think about your household or where you live, and think about the utilities that you have to keep your house alive. You may have electricity, you may have gas, you may have cable, you may have other things, you may have water. And you're realizing that your boss just told you that you can't work overtime. You know, starting next year, there's no more overtime, and you're dependent on an extra couple $100s a month for overtime. In addition to that, I'm going to reduce your income by about 10%. And so you make the decision. You know, these 5 utilities you have to your house are all important, but you can only keep 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, and you have to make the decision: what's more important, gas, water, electricity, or cable? And so you'll have a lot of people saying, well, we need gas more important than electricity. We don't need the cable. Some of you may say, well, we like the cable, but we don't need 5 HBO channels. You know what I'm saying? So those are the type of decisions we need to make here at the campus. We're going to be dealing with limited funds, and we're going to try to still promote and offer the same quality type of programs that we have, but we may not have the ability to offer everything we have. It's like the other day, just today when I was rushing to get here, I went through the drive-thru at Jack in the Box, and when I was a kid, I knew Jack in the Box as a hamburger place. But if you're looking at its menu board these days, you could buy Mexican food, Asian food, Japanese food, and there's a salad bar, and yet there's some hamburgers. And you ask yourself, well, what's their core business? What do they really do? And they're trying to do everything for everybody. And we're not going to have that ability to offer everything, and that becomes the challenge. That's the challenge that we start with. And so one of the things that we have the ability to do with Senate is to help influence the budget process. And we do it in a couple key ways. And one is through something we call participative governance, or shared governance. And that happens with faculty involvement, classified staff involvement, and ASG and student involvement. And Carlos Gonzalez was just here. He just prepared to walk out for class, but I wanted to recognize him. He's our student president here for campus. We have 2 primary roles that have the best ability to influence the Office of the President. That's our Planning and Budget Council, and what we do also through our instructional side of the house, another group called, or another committee called Program Effectiveness, or PEPC. And how do we get this? Well, we get this through something called the Temple Swan, and I know there's a lot of faculty here, so I'm going to I don't want to preach to the choir, but there's 2 key areas of the Temple Swan that allow us to give this influence to help the discretionary funding, and that's usually these 2 areas here. A process of program review. Why is that important? Because we don't want to have happen what Sue talked about. If we have to reduce our unfunded FTS by 100, we don't want to have a spiraling campus. So we need to make sure, if we're going to reduce our students, our FTS, unfortunately, by 100, we need to make sure we're choosing the right program groups to do so. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, you know, we don't want to throw the water out with the baby, or
Baby with the bathwater.
There you go. And so, and the other one is we have direct involvement in our in institutional planning, and we do that through PVC. Pepsi has achieved a real milestone, I think, since over the last 7-8 years that I've been here. And one of the things that we've done this year, we embraced as faculty, and it started with Senate, is that there was a recent board policy, and which is filtered down to an AP, which is 4021, and this is a program discontinuance method. And our Senate looked at that, we embraced it, and we've taken this from Senate to our Pepsi committee, and we've attempted to look at our current program review process on the instructional side of the house and start building in some of the metrics of program discontinuation. We found out that we're using a lot of those metrics already, but the challenge for us is to start that conversation amongst peer faculty to say what's important.
cable, gas, electricity, or water, and how is it important, and how do we measure that? How do we measure that importance? And so we've begun that discussion. Another thing that faculty have agreed, or through the shared governance committee has agreed to do, all programs this year will be going through a program review cycle that will be completed by April 30th. So we could be able to take our analysis to Planning and Budget Council and say, and so we could say, we've looked at these 26 programs, 26, 28 programs, and here's how we see them. And that's a critical element for Pepsi. We never got there before. We're gonna get into some real peer review, peer analysis, and it's been a major milestone for us, and I have to thank the faculty and the staff and the students who've been involved in that process. A key component is our Planning and Budget Council. This is the closest committee that we have that's not only literally close to the President's office, but directly influences or attempts to influence the President's office. And we look at budget development guidelines, the budget allocation process. One thing that when we lost John Elamine, we've had the opportunity to have Sue attend our Planning and Budget Councils over the last couple sessions. And one thing that what we lost, what we have gained, we're starting to learn about some of the things we can do in planning that we were kind of cloudy on before. One of the things that Chrissy had mentioned, we have the model building capacity of look at a 10-year model, what this campus has done in terms of how we spent or how we use our allocation of our general fund budget over the last 10 years. And if you look at what we've done, regardless of the trend, the financial trends we've been in, we pretty much stayed in the same percentage of deliveries from staff, management, classified, and faculty over the last 10 years. The good thing about it is that we're starting these discussions now trying to really understand what does it really cost to deliver a program? What's the true cost of it? Are we just looking at general fund dollars? Should other funds be accounted for too as well? And so with the help of Sue, to help us give us good guidance, we're gonna become more relevant as a planning committee, and that relevance is going to equal to a better influencing ability with our President's office. So we're looking at programs, we're looking at how to better, if we're working with limited finances, then there's a big discussion, not just how to spend it, but also what type of campus do we want to be today and in the future. And so those are the things your Senate's working on, and that's my slide presentation. And
well, thank you for coming. We are going to post this PowerPoint on our website and everything. So, and I think we're probably going to maybe show the video elsewhere or make it available to you if you want to see it again, or people who weren't here can.
Can we edit that?